Breaking tonight, reports the White House is pushing ahead on securing the nation's borders in another packed day, wrapping up the most dramatic week yet in a new presidency. I'm Martha McCallum, and this is the first 100 days. So the last 5 days, marked by the administration's first court fight, major moves in the Senate, putting the cabinet in place, culminating with new reaction from the president to a decision blocking his new national security policy, and that's just day 22. So earlier, Vice President Mike Pence swearing in the new Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price happened in the middle of the night. The president now has his man to take up the pledge to repeal and replace Obamacare. More on that straight ahead. Also today, the president hosting the Prime Minister of Japan and weighing in on last night's decision, putting the brakes on his, quote, extreme vetting orders.
We had a decision which we think we'll be very successful with. It shouldn't have taken this much time because safety is a primary reason. One of the reasons I'm standing here today is the security of our country. The voters felt that I would give it the best security. So we'll be doing something very rapidly having to do with additional security for our country. You'll be seeing that sometime next week. In addition, we will continue to go through the court process, and ultimately I have no doubt that we'll win that particular case.
So there you have it. Chris Wallace, host of Fox News Sunday, is here in moments on reports the White House is working on a new version of the language in that travel ban order. But we begin with Dan Springer, live in Seattle, where this legal fight stands. So, Dan, what comes next?
Well, what comes next is what we expect from, President Trump next week. He has 4 basic options, Martha, and it sounded like from his news conference today, he might take 2 at the same time. Let's look at those 4 options. One would be to appeal to a larger panel of the Ninth Circuit. It's called an en banc hearing. That would be 11 judges picked randomly from the remaining 26 judges in the Ninth Circuit. He could appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, and he could try the case on its merits in district court. He seemed to suggest he would do that by saying that he will win eventually. The 4th option would be to rewrite the executive order, make it clear that legal permanent residents, such as green card holders, are not affected by the travel ban. The White House counsel tried to clarify that when it comes to enforcement, but it was after the fact. So if the case goes back to Judge Robart, we know that a schedule could happen as soon as next week where we have briefs. And Judge Robart, as I said, in his ruling in issuing the TRO, said that it is likely that the state of Washington would win on the merits of its case. Let's hear from Bob Ferguson, the Attorney General of Washington. After the ruling last night, he gave the president his own suggestion.
The president does have a choice. He can continue to fight this, or he can tear up this executive order and start over. I would strongly encourage him to consider the latter course of action.
And here's the catch, Martha. If the president does issue a new executive order, there's nothing to say that Bob Ferguson and other states wouldn't sue for blocking that one as well. So we'll have to see how it plays out, what the Trump administration does next. Martha?
Dan, thank you. So attacks on President Trump coming fast and furious moments after that decision was announced. Within minutes, Hillary Clinton tweeted 3-0, a reference to the unanimous decision of the 3-judge panel to continue the block on the president's orders. The counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, fired back this way. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. Period, she wrote, a reference to the 3 states that Clinton lost, costing her the White House. Chris Wallace, host of Fox News Sunday, here on that and a lot of what we have seen happen over the course of this week. Chris, good to have you with us tonight. So looking at this week, and looking at the hit that the Trump presidency took from that decision last night, how lasting do you think that is?
Well, I don't know how lasting it is, but it was a substantial hit. I mean, think of the fact, as you say, we're now into day 22. And here in the first 3 weeks of the Trump presidency, you have a Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. Yes, I know that they're the most left-wing court. Yes, I know they're the most reversed by the Supreme Court. But it's still a Circuit Court of Appeals basically saying that the president did not make a persuasive case that this travel ban was necessary to protect national security. So the court is saying that they side with a judge and with the attorneys general of Minnesota and Wisconsin against the president of the United States on the issue of protecting the country. That's a real slap in the face. And the other point is the fact that we're talking about this right now. There's an awful lot to the Trump agenda: protecting jobs, tax reform, Obamacare, trade, infrastructure, all of those issues. All of the oxygen about them has been eaten up in this long, difficult, and ultimately unsuccessful fight over the travel ban. You wonder if this is how the Trump administration wants to proceed.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. And you couple that, Chris, with the fact that the word earlier today was that, they're going to rework this order. I heard Judge Napolitano talking about earlier and saying, really it needs to be bulletproof. When you put this order out in the first place, it had to be legally bulletproof. That would suggest that that it was sloppy, that there were missteps in the way that this thing was written. So this doesn't have to be the main story. Perhaps it is an indication that they should have handled this differently.
Well, you got that admission from the new Secretary of Homeland Security, General John Kelly, who in a congressional hearing said that it had not been rolled out properly. He took personal responsibility, which is a very unusual thing in Washington for anyone to say, blame me for it. But in fact, it wasn't his. It was mostly the White House and the top aides around President Trump. But yes, it was sloppy. It was sloppy in the way it was drafted, the way that it was rolled out, the lack of consultation with top administration officials, the lack of consultation with congressional leaders. And again, we have spent a week, a third of the presidency, on this subject. There's so many things that this president wants to accomplish, and I wonder, is this the most important?
Yeah, steps on the message. So let's move on to some of those other issues. Today, he met with Prime Minister Abe from Japan. He's bringing him this evening back to Mar-a-Lago to play some golf. It's an interesting way of dealing with these foreign leaders, and he's building relationships with China as well. He went back on the One China statement that he made right after he became president. What's your take on how he's doing on that front, Chris?
Well, it's interesting. He, in an interview with me in mid-December for Fox News Sunday, I asked him about the call with the Taiwanese leader, and he, in effect, said, well, the one China policy, which has been in place since the 1970s, that we recognize Beijing, mainland China, as the only government of the Chinese. He said that's up for grabs, and that'll be a negotiating tool with a bunch of other issues we have with the Chinese in the South China Sea, with devaluation of their currency. And then there was a front-page story in the New York Times today saying that since those comments, that President Xi, the president of China, had refused to speak to him. So President Trump had to back down, agree, yes, we're going to recognize the one China policy, and he got his conversation. And I think this is a work in progress, a continuing education, that when you're the president as opposed to a candidate, everything you say is very carefully scrutinized. And when you're upsetting decades of established policy in terms of relationships between countries like the U.S. and China, it's not taken lightly by foreign capitals. You've got to be really careful in what you say.
Yeah. Quick comment on the Kellyanne Conway situation. And does it sort of, go forward from there? Do they have to be careful about the way they discuss the tangential business relationships that exist all across the family?
Look, there are a lot of people that have said that this is just going to be a continuing problem, that President Trump did not adequately separate himself from his business interests. I got to say, though, the spectacle of Kellyanne Conway, a counselor to the president, in the White House briefing room. Remember, she's our employee, where she's paid a government salary, shilling for Ivanka Trump and saying, go out and buy Ivanka products. That was so far over the ethics rules about conflicts of interest and the blurring of private and public that a really conservative and loyal Republican like Jason Chaffetz, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, agreed to launch an investigation as to whether this was a breach of ethics rules. They have got to clear this up.
All right. Chris, thank you so much. Good to see you. And Congressman Pete Hoekstra, who served as House Intelligence Committee chairman, and Richard Fowler, a nationally syndicated radio talk show host and Fox News contributor. Welcome, gentlemen. Good to have both of you with us tonight.
Happy Friday.
Richard, you kind of get both sides of the argument. And, that woman at the end who said, look, it's sad, but the fact of the matter is that a judge reported her to leave the country back in 2013. So she has overstayed that by several years.
Well, don't get me wrong. I think this is a very, very, very sad turn of affairs, which really should push our members of Congress to really find a way to have comprehensive immigration reform. This is an economic question for me, Martha. Think about it. So Guadalupe, she has two children, right, who are both American citizens who no longer have a mother to take care of them, meaning the American people are going to be stuck on the line to take care of them. And with numbers that we're seeing is estimates that it could cost us, if we follow Donald Trump's executive order to the T, it could cost us $118 billion just to take care of those children who live in mixed status households, or households where the parent is undocumented, but the children are citizens. So when the parents get documented, the children becomes wards of the state.
I think people would be interested to know that according to Pew Research, there are 1 million illegal immigrants in Los Angeles and Orange County. And Pete Hoekstra, there are plenty of people who come from countries all around the world who get deportation notices, and, they pack their bags and they eventually have to leave the country, and then they go back to their country and they work on getting back in legally. And so it seems to me, just reading this story and going through it, that what's happening is that the implementation of the law is starting to be adhered to.
That's exactly right. That's the irony here, is that, wow, we actually have a president who said he was going to implement the law when he was running for office. He's now president. He's now implementing the law. The American people and others who live here, and some who live here illegally, have figured this out. They're now protesting. This is not an economic issue or anything like that. This is an issue of the law. And Richard is exactly right. Congress now needs to get the message, because the law is going to be enforced. If Congress doesn't like it and they don't like the executive actions that the president is taking, it's time for them to, because it's going to change. We're either going to work through this transition in an organized way, or it's going to be a very, very difficult way. But the president is signaling to Congress and to the American people, we are going to enforce the law. I'm willing to work with Democrats and Congress to change the law. Yeah. But if you don't change the law, I'm going to use the powers that I have as president to implement the law as it's written.
Yeah. So do you see that happening, Richard? Lawmakers starting to get together and say, let's try to work on comprehensive immigration legislation. I feel like I've heard this in my entire life.
I feel like I've heard the same thing, Martha. I think, as we know, Barack Obama deported more illegal immigrants than any other president in American history. He probably will be topped by Donald Trump in the next coming weeks. But
they're following the laws that are currently on the books. This is nothing radical. This is following the laws on the books.
I'm not disagreeing with that. They absolutely are following the laws on the books. And I think that's why it's time for Congress to work on changing those laws. Congressman Tillis from North Carolina has issued a bill. Hopefully we can get comprehensive immigration reform done. But this is, like I said once again, for the American people at home to understand, this is an economic question that we've really got to ask ourselves, which is why our members of Congress have got to get stuff done, right? I mean, the truth of the matter is 2.4 million mortgages are held by undocumented workers. If they get deported, that's going to cost our economy $4.7 trillion in the GDP.
That first you implement the law, and then perhaps what you're talking about nudges Congress to act. But I got to leave it there.
Hopefully.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Richard and Pete Hoekstra, thank you so much for being here tonight. 7 years after anti-Obamacare town halls took aim at Democratic members, Republicans are now getting an earful from frustrated constituents, voicing concerns over everything from government inaction to executive orders to now, ironically, the repeal of Obamacare is the source of these raucous town halls. This video comes in from an event in Utah where House Oversight Chair Jason Chaffetz went to speak to what he thought was going to be a friendly group of local voters. Joining me now, Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist, and Kevin Chavez is former D.C. Democratic councilman. Welcome to both of you. Good to have you here. Molly, let me start with you. Payback appears to be what's happening to Jason Chaffetz and others out there.
I'm not entirely sure that's true. It's always a good idea to pay attention to large protest movements, but this has a feel of something else entirely. I mean, Jason Chaffetz won re-election with 73.5% of the vote. Some of the people interviewed that were at this were not local constituents. They came in from Scottsdale, Arizona, driving over 600 miles to protest him. So this is something altogether different. It has a bit of a feel of grassroots, of AstroTurf instead of grassroots activism. And it's definitely something real that's happening. There's a lot of outrage on the left, but this is a little bit too incoherent to be compared to a Tea Party protest.
Just staying with you for a second, Molly, are they all Democrats and liberals, or are some of these people never Trumpers? Because we saw what happened in Utah during the presidential election, and perhaps some of them weren't happy with him for sort of the flip-flop on President Trump.
Right. Well, another place where there was a protest was Tennessee, where Diane Black had her town hall protested. And that's a state that went overwhelmingly for Trump. Whereas with Utah, even though he beat Hillary Clinton by 20-some, or almost 20 points, there was a large anti-Trump vote in Utah. Still, this does not strike me as the kind of principled opposition to Trump that you saw, even though there will be a call for Jason Chaffetz in his role as oversight chairman to do a good job in holding the Trump administration accountable.
Kevin, what do you think of these protests?
Well, look, feelings are raw, and protest politics is a direct result of people feeling disenfranchised or upset or disappointed. But I think we've got to find a way to appear to our higher angels. We've got a lot of work to do in this country, and I think that, frankly, the onus is on the president and his team to be uniters as opposed to dividers. And I think that, you know, through some of the cabinet picks, there's an opportunity to rise above all of this.
Wow, what a
and
novel
I think
concept.
to demonstrate, yeah, I mean, but I think that's important. And I think that, look, there are going to be people who are going to want to fight no matter what. But we've got a lot of work to do in this country, and there's ways to bring ourselves, all of us together. And I think the president can do that.
Yeah, very important point. I want to show everybody the video of Betsy DeVos as she committed the cardinal sin today of trying to go visit a school, a public school in Washington, D.C. in her new role as Secretary of Education. She was blocked at the door by protesters and had to turn around and leave, Molly. Sad situation, to be sure.
Well, this is another situation where people are really not thinking through how their protest appears to many people. And this isn't the first time Democrats have blocked doors to a public school, and it won't be the last. But it's exactly the kind of thing that people don't like seeing. And it's almost a metaphor for the situation with teachers' unions. You know, supporters of teachers' unions don't want to let people into the schools who want to change the system or improve educational outcomes for poor students whose parents can't just afford to get them sent to an expensive private school.
That's a great point. And I always point out in these protests, it's not the parents who are out there blocking, believe me. They would probably like for her to come in, and a lot of them want their kids to have the advantages and alternatives that she's talking about in many cases. Kevin, what do you make of it?
Well, look, Democrats aren't the only ones that block doors. George Wallace famously blocked some doors in Alabama we talk about. But I tell you this, I'm disappointed that the protesters are doing this to Secretary DeVos. This is an opportunity to channel that outrage toward what really needs to be focused on in education. Every 42 seconds, a kid drops out of school in America. 60% of our graduates are neither college nor career ready. There should be a sense of outrage about the educational outputs in America, and I think Secretary DeVos can help cure that. But people need to focus on the real deal. We are not educating our most precious resource, and that's America's children.
All right, you both make great points. Thank you so much for being here today, Kevin and Molly. Great to see you. So as soon as Tom Price was sworn in earlier today, we started hearing warnings that Obamacare is on its way out. Dr. Mark Siegel here on what happens then. Plus, President Donald Trump simultaneously fighting leaks and the courts. Up next, we're going to talk to former White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer and Democratic strategist Mark Alderman on reports that the president is frustrated.
You've never seen so much paper on a president's desk. That's because we're negotiating lots of deals for our country, which would be tremendous.
I will repeat that the president has been very negative about any leaks, has really pushed back upon them in no uncertain terms, as well he should. I don't think that the leaks came from certain people because they would have been unflattering, and they certainly didn't come from the White House.
That was President Trump's top counselor, Kellyanne Conway, at the start of this week, addressing the numerous leaks that have plagued the administration in only the first 3 weeks in office. The week ended with Mr. Trump finding himself on the wrong side of a court decision. Insiders claim that both of those situations are examples of a president who just wants to get things done, while slowly coming to grips with the immense size and checks of the government bureaucracy. Joining us now, Ari Fleischer, former White House press secretary, and Mark Alderman, a Democratic strategist. Gentlemen, welcome tonight. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
So, Ari, a lot of this comes from a Politico piece, which has a ton of those, leaky elements all over its pages in this piece. How much do you believe in this? How does it look like they're doing so far to you?
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to this. I think it is difficult to be an outsider and come in and take the reins of the government and to make it all work smooth. But it's a balance, Martha. If you said, do you want a traditional politician, someone who has been there all their lives and knows what they're doing to run the federal government today? We settled that in November. The answer was no. The American people did not want that. I think it'd probably be smoother in some respects. The bureaucracies would like the White House better if you had Hillary or if you had a traditional politician. But Donald Trump was not elected to be smooth. He was elected to change Washington. And it's going to be bumpy. He's going to learn as he goes. His staff will learn as he goes. But this is what the American people voted for. And frankly, I'm much more comfortable with this than I am with an inside hand who knows what they're doing. I want Washington to change myself.
You know, I remember so many people that I talked to across the country when we were covering the course of the election, Mark. And I would ask them, you know, who do you support? Why? And those who said they supported Donald Trump, I'd say, why? Why do you support him? They say, because I want someone to shake things up. I'm tired of the status quo. I'm tired of everything. You know, so what if it looks smooth? It's not working for me. So is that what we're seeing here?
Well, Martha, it's never too soon to expect competence from the commander-in-chief. This is a serious job, and Trump plainly has no patience for his position. He is like an adolescent who got hold of his parents' car keys but never learned to drive. So you can change personnel, you can plug these leaks, you can give it some more time, but unless and until Donald Trump grows into this role, we're going to have The Apprentice for 4 years.
Well, when you take a look at the Dow Jones Industrials, it seems like there are elements of this economy who are actually quite satisfied. Ari, do you think that's fair criticism from Mark?
Yes and no. I didn't think it is if you were an insider. It's a fair criticism if you like the way things have been and you want that to continue, if your highest premium is making the interagency review process work smoothly. But if you are one of those people who lives in middle America who says that for decades nothing has worked for you, the economy is poor, you haven't gotten a raise, no politician has listened to you, and along comes outsider Donald Trump and can relate to you, and all of a sudden you realize, here's the outsider who cares about me. Yes, that's where Donald Trump is invested, and that's where he's ultimately, Martha, going to be judged a success or a failure. If he gets the economy moving faster instead of 0 to 1% GDP growth, if he gets medium wages up for working class Americans especially, this is what it means to make America great again in the eyes of many who've been suffering because their region of America isn't doing so great.
Clearly a lot of ruffled feathers within
the
establishment, as Ari says. Excuse me for interrupting. So what? You know, so what if he's ruffling feathers inside Washington? Right. Mark, last thought.
Martha, may I just observe that it is funny that for 8 years in a stock market that more than doubled, the Republicans gave President Obama no credit for that. And here we are 20 days into the Trump administration, and he is, of course, responsible for the rise of the market. I think that
but Mark,
is a
those
little
gains
soon
went to the top.
judge.
Those gains were shared. They were not shared universally, especially with working class people. The rich benefited nicely from the Obama years.
Thanks, you guys. We got to leave it there. We'll have a lot more to talk about in the weeks and months to come. Glad to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
So coming up, President Trump's brand new HHS secretary ready to go with his plan to repeal and replace Obamacare. This is a huge deal, in the words of someone we all remember from the prior administration. Dr. Mark Siegel is here to tell us what this means at your doctor's office. Plus, we will take a look back at this week that was when Chris Stirewalt, Alex Conant, and Julie Roginski give a grade to the week when we come back. And NYU professor of medicine. Doctor, good to see you tonight.
Great to see you, Martha.
So repeal and replace is the big question. We saw protests that have already been breaking out around the country, people saying that their health care is going to be taken away from them. You know Dr. Price and now HHS Secretary Dr. Price. How's he going to do it?
Well, I think he's going to be a point person for this. And as Carl Cameron was just saying, we don't know the pace that this is going to roll out. But I'll tell you what he is committed to. He's committed to restoring the doctor-patient relationship as front and center for healthcare decisions. He doesn't assume, Dr. Price, that insurance is always the answer or government is always the answer. And I can tell you in the doctor's office, a lot of times somebody comes in with insurance, like Obamacare, and they don't necessarily get the services they need. Dr. Price is aware of that. He's a practicing orthopedist for 20 years. You know, he's been talking about this since Obamacare was initially passed. And he's very aware that in the future, we need something where there's more choice involved, where there's health savings accounts, where patients can pay out of pocket for more things, where there's tax deductions. He put forth a proposal where you get tax credits and you use that to buy insurance with, as well as directly services.
So it sounds, that's a comprehensive plan that is very different than what we got in Obamacare. So the big question is, how do you give the new program and how do you get it started while protecting people and making sure that you don't have those gaps in between? Because that's the biggest concern that people have.
I think you add rather than take away right away. And I think, again, in the clip that Carl just showed, I think you see some of that. You have Medicaid expansion. I don't believe the administration is going to remove Medicaid expansion. It may add a private option to it. It may switch it to block grants. Same with Medicare. They might add a private option to Medicare. I've always said add a catastrophic option. Right. But right now, you have a situation where the government is subsidizing everything. You go to the state exchanges, and 2/3 of the policies that are sold there are subsidized, 2/3 of it. And then you get to the doctor's office and you can't necessarily buy care. I think you're going to see more price transparency. You're going to see more competition. President Trump has said insurance will be available across state lines. That means repealing a law that's been in place for many years.
Mark, what's your sense of, go ahead, what the key is, real quick.
The key here is you got a physician for the third time in history running HHS. He's also got the FDA under his jurisdiction. An actual doctor who knows what doctors and patients face. That's what's new.
How long is it going to take, in your opinion?
Well, I'd like to see some of it right away. If I know President Trump, some of it would be right away. The individual mandate is practically unenforceable. Maybe that will be gotten rid of. The essential benefits package, which, mandates what a policy looks like, is why the premiums are going up. Maybe that will be gotten rid of. And again, a catastrophic option might be added. Some changes can be done right away.
Dr. Mark Siegel, thank you very much.
Thanks,
Good to see you, Mark.
Great to see you.
So coming up, it has been quite a week for the Trump administration. We've said that for 3 weeks so far, and it's been true every time. Luckily, we've got Chris Stirewalt, Alex Conant, and Julie Roginski to catch everyone up and grade the week when we come back.
He is free to speak his mind. Part of the reason the president got elected is because he speaks his mind. He doesn't hold it back. He's authentic. And he's not going to sit back, I think, when he feels very passionately about something.
Another busy week for the Trump administration. On Monday, President Trump slammed the media for underreporting terror. Tuesday, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals heard arguments on the travel ban. And on the Hill, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell sidelined Senator Liz Warren in a dramatic moment. Yesterday, the president learned of the fallout from the Ninth Circuit ruling against him on his extreme vetting order. There was a lot more, too. So here now with where all this is going, Chris Stirewalt, our Fox News politics editor. Alex Conant was a communications director for Marco Rubio's presidential campaign. Julie Roginski is a Democratic analyst and Fox News contributor. Great to have all of you here. So let's take it on. 21 days in, it feels like we've been here for about 1,000, but so much has happened. Chris, what's your take on what this week looked like for the Trump administration?
Well, we're still in the early going, and there were definitely misses, but there were some successes. There were some pretty notable successes. One is we saw some bipartisan agreement on the position the administration started to rough out last week on Iran, where you saw Democrats and Republicans alike coming together in favor of sanctions. So that was a sign that on a foreign policy front, things could be moving in a good direction, something you heard echoed today when he was with the Prime Minister of Japan, talking about agreement with China and so on and so on. So you're starting to see some good things there. But as you pointed out, the Ninth Circuit and that decision and the falderall and the constant outrage surrounding that issue, not so good.
Yeah. So what grade would you give the week, Chris?
I'm going, I had him at a B, but then I got to say that the Nordstrom stuff takes him down to a C+ for the week.
Elaborate on the what's your take? Do people care about that? Is my question. I know we all obsess over it, and I talked to Kellyanne about it last night. But do you think people care about it in America?
That's the point. They do not. Therefore, the president should not talk about it, nor should he have his spokesperson or his leading strategist discussing the issue. You got to focus on the business of the people. That costs him half a letter grade.
Yeah. All right. He's such a tough grader. Alex Conant. I'm glad I didn't have Chris. Alex, what do you think of the week?
Yeah, look, Chris is a smart guy. I rarely disagree with him, but I actually give the president a slightly better grade. I'd give him a B. The early days are all about setting up processes and personnel. And he had a lot of success with personnel this week, getting several key cabinet officials confirmed. And my sources in the White House tell me that the processes are being put in place to have better executive orders moving forward so we don't have these sort of legal fights that the president and the White House have lost this week and last. So I think that they're moving in the right direction. Therefore, I'd give them a solid B.
Solid B. Julie Roginski is going to give him an A+. I just know it. I just know she is because Julie's such a fan. Julie, what did you think? How'd they do this week?
Well, you know, I think Chris is right. He did have some successes, and Alex is right as well. I mean, he did get his people confirmed. There was some question about Betsy DeVos. She was confirmed. So in that sense, that was a good win for the White House. I will say the most troubling thing to me this week was actually what happened yesterday and this morning with Michael Flynn, which is a problem that could potentially last much longer than just the week, where Michael Flynn seemingly forced the vice president to come out and say something that charitably could be called several untruths about whether he discussed sanctions with the Russian ambassador prior to him becoming national security advisor. And so that becomes a big problem that potentially could open the administration up to hearings on the issue. And so as a result of that, I would give him a C-.
C-. So Chris, C's from Julie and Chris. Chris, let me go back around the horn to you on that, though. How big a deal is this Michael Flynn Russia question?
So we have a very leaky administration right now, and it is springing leaks on all sides, and that is a big problem. Every administration leaks. This one leaks a lot. And how much of this is due to infighting, we don't know. But oftentimes that is the root cause. And if there is a schism in the administration, or there are people who don't trust Flynn, or Flynn doesn't trust them, and this stuff is springing out of that space, that could be, in addition to the hearings Julie mentioned, that could be on a going forward basis a big problem.
So, but on the substance of it, Alex, you know, Chris is talking about the political ramifications, which are very real. On the substance of it, is it problematic, Alex?
It could be problematic. This is all coming about because apparently the FBI is looking into these calls, and if that is true,
there was nothing illegal in them. I mean, well, that's the latest.
And if nothing is illegal, then this, I think, will be quickly forgotten and be chalked up to an early mistake, some early miscommunication within the administration. If there's more to it, yes, it's absolutely a problem. When the vice president goes on TV, as he did on CBS's Face the Nation a couple of weeks ago, and asserts something that then is reported to be not true, that is an issue that the administration will have to deal with at some point.
Yeah, I mean, the story is that he mentioned to a high-level Russian official not to worry about the sanctions or something along those lines. We don't know exactly what he said,
right,
but that there was an indication that maybe there would be relief in the future, which instantly reminded me of the moment that President Obama said that to Medvedev. You know, like, don't worry, as soon as I get reelected, you know, all this stuff is going to go away. Yeah. We'll have more flexibility, Julie. So what's the difference?
Well, the difference is, first and foremost, he was not supposed to be doing and talking policy before he was the national security advisor. We have one president at a time. But secondly, this is part of a larger pattern of potential Russian interference in the election, whether Michael Flynn, who had acknowledged accepting payments from Russia Today, which is a propaganda arm of the Putin administration, was involved in some of that. And so you have people like, this is not a Democratic issue. You have senators like Senator McCain, Senator Graham, and others who are very serious about looking into this. If this is the predicate for that kind of investigation to be launched, that could be a massive headache for the Trump administration going forward.
So going back to quickly to the Nordstrom question, Chris, because I know you're a big shopper, and I know this is a big issue for you, and you're really concerned about it. But I'm going to give you the last word on this here. What do they need to do to make sure, because this is going to happen again and again with, you know, businesses and interests, they need to be on the same page at the White House, do they not, about how they're going to respond to these kind of questions?
Not only do they have to be on the same page of the White House, but they must not steal the president's central message, which was something we would say in West Virginia about Jay Rockefeller when he came down there to be senator. He's too rich to steal. So just make sure that that is carried forward, that Donald Trump is always seen as doing the people's business and not enriching himself and his family, even if it's just a dad being nice to his daughter.
You guys are great. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, Martha.
So before we leave you tonight, here is the quote of the night for this Friday. It is sent to us from a viewer. We've gotten so many good ones. This is from Richie Skaggs. A person who never made a mistake, never tried anything new. That's Albert Einstein. Good advice. It rings true for the White House, perhaps, and for the rest of us as well. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm Martha MacCallum. O'Reilly is up next. We'll see you back here Monday at 7 p.m.